This is Royce Kennebrew, independent candidate for Michigan's 12th congressional district, who, when elected, will caucus with the Democrats. Welcome to Dark Horse Politics Podcast, where we talk about everything politics and culture. On this episode, we will be talking about the ridiculous comments of Representative Byron Donalds from Florida when he talks about African American families and Jim Crow. And next, we will be talking about the ridiculous visit of Donald Trump to my district, 48227, and his appearance at a so-called, air quotes, black church. Let's stay informed. Recently, in the swing state of Pennsylvania, Representative Byron Donalds in the city of brotherly love made some comments about the black family and Jim Crow that caused people to go into an uproar, where Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries spoke in the well of the House of Representatives and ended his speech with, "You better check yourself before you wreck yourself." And we're going to, first of all, we're going to listen to the entire clip of Representative Donald speaking.
I grew up with my mom. My dad and my mom, things didn't work out. As an adult, I look at my father and I say, bro, I don't know what happened, but you my father and I love you.
Wow.
I don't know what happened. I wasn't there.
Wow.
But I'm gonna tell you this, growing up, the one thing I knew I wanted to do, and this is not about my father, this is about what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be a father to myself.
Wow.
And so one of the things that's actually happening in our culture, which you're now starting to see in our politics, is the reinvigoration of black families with younger black men and black women. And that is also helping to breed the revival of a black middle class in America. You see, during Jim Crow, the black family was together.
That's right.
During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people are always a bit conservative-minded, but more black people voted conservatively. And then HEW, Lyndon Johnson, and then you go down that road, and now we are where we are. What's happened in America the last 10 years, and I say it because it's my contemporaries, it's Wesley's contemporaries, you're starting to see more black people be married in homes, raising kids. It's when you home with your wife raising your kids, and then you look at the world, you're saying, now wait a minute, time out. This does not look right. How can I get something to my kids? It goes back to the conversation of generational wealth. Not just having a job, generational wealth.
We wanted to show you Representative Donald's comments in their full context, because so much in media and the news, certain news outlets are just showing only clips of a particular situation, especially in regards to Joe Biden, that you don't get the full understanding. And so we wanted to let you know, to have you see exactly what he said before we really go in on the crazy mess that he said in regards to African Americans and the black family. Now, here's the problem with what Representative Donalds had to say. Now, I can 3% understand on why he said Jim Crow, as in talking about the time period of Jim Crow and not necessarily meaning Jim Crow. That's plausible. That's plausible. I think about maybe 4% of that is possible, right? But here's the problem, even with that. Why couldn't he have said the 50s and 60s? Why couldn't he say during the Eisenhower administration or during the Truman administration? Why couldn't he say post-World War II? Why couldn't he say during the Vietnam period? Why couldn't he have said during the other war period, the Korean conflict? He could have said all of those things to still talk about that date, but he particularly talked about Jim Crow. Now, here's one of the problems. One of the problems is that even if he is wrong, using Jim Crow is so racially charged in our historical memory just to use that term. Just to use that term will bring up that imagery. That means that Representative Donalds is extremely ignorant, which I don't believe he is. I believe that he did that and said that on purpose. Now let me get to the other part, which is also extremely important. He also said in that clip that during the LBJ, the 60s period, these things happened to create the welfare state. Now, if you look at right-wing media, and I have to choke it down like castor oil so often so that I understand what they're saying and why they're saying what they're saying. One of their arguments is that during the 60s, that a welfare state was created by the policies of Lyndon Johnson. But we know that it is arguably one of the greatest historical episodes for African American advancement, where you get the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, you get the Fair Housing Act in 1968, and after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where these things occurred. And he is trying to disparage that time period. But here's something that they don't talk about that impacted the Black family. I'm going to talk about here in particular in Detroit. People think that urban areas, in particular Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., these places were impacted and experienced white flight after the riots that occurred in 67 and 68. But that is not particularly true. There is a book by an author by the last name of Dr. Wilson, who talks about when jobs disappear, when work disappears. And he chronicles how in the 50s, with the change of manufacturing, that jobs left Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., and that was a huge impact on the African American family. But Republicans never talk about that when they are trying to disparage the 60s and what Lyndon Baines Johnson did in moving this country forward. They also never talk about the fact that the federal government was given federally backed loans to vast majority of white people to move out in the suburbs of Detroit, to move in the suburbs of Chicago, to move in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Baltimore. That impacted the Black family as well, and that never gets discussed. So when you hear people talking about the welfare state, when Republicans get on that mess, start to talk to them. Well, what about the manufacturing change that caused Black jobs to leave the community that hurt Black families? What about the federally backed mortgages that caused white flight in those communities that destabilize the tax base? And then coming later in the 70s and the 80s, drugs like heroin and crack impacting the Black community. So those are some things that we got to remember when you hear crazy stuff like this from Republicans like Byron Donalds and others. But what he said was just totally crazy, and it got so many people upset. And when I heard it, I just was like, what? As a congressional candidate, I love getting out in the district and speaking and meeting with constituents. And I talked to, in my particular district at a faith-based institution, these particular comments that Representative Donalds makes. Listen to the conversation that I had. This is a good one that you, what do you know about, what can you tell me about Jim Crow? What do you know about Jim Crow?
Jim Crow, surely after slavery, a set of laws that were made up to basically keep African Americans in their place.
African Americans in their place. Byron Donalds from the state of Florida has said that during Jim Crow time, the black family was, he was insinuating was better off under Jim Crow, like in the 50s and the 60s. Now, it's a black guy. And he said that the black family was better, was insinuating that the black family was better off. Now, do you think the black family was better off during Jim Crow?
Well, I know the families, the leader of the family had less opportunity for jobs.
Yep.
Restrictions on almost everything he did, where he could drink, where he could take a crap.
Right. Absolutely.
So not having certain freedoms,
Yeah.
I think the family was
Worse off, right. And so sometimes, David, when they talk about that, there's two other things that they don't talk about. They don't talk about the change in manufacturing.
Okay.
Like that I'll just tell you how it impacted Detroit. People think that the riots at the end of the 60s is when Detroit's population started to decrease. But Detroit's population started to decrease in the mid 50s.
Okay.
And in the mid 50s, there was a recession, and then manufacturing started to change. And so when those jobs started to leave Detroit, the population started to go down. So it happened before the riots. But Republicans never talk about the change in manufacturing. They try to blame programs like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and what Lyndon Johnson did in the 60s to blame for the reason why the African American community. They're trying to pretty much say that LBJ and what he did with the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Immigration Act, and the Fair Housing Act are the reasons why the African American community are the way they are. So you don't have to be a policy wonk or a historian to understand the impact of talking about Jim Crow and how those comments that Representative Donalds made, how they just don't make sense. And actually, they're par for the course how Republicans deal with race. Hello, this is Royce Kennebrew, independent candidate for Michigan's 12th congressional district, who, when elected, will caucus with the Democrats. The most difficult part about the campaigning process is raising funds. So if you want different leadership in Michigan's 12th congressional district, someone who is going to work for all constituents and not their own personal interests, please go to voteroyce.com. Give $5, $10, $15. Every and anything will help. Thank you. On Father's Day, presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump came to my congressional district, Michigan's 12th, zip code 48227, to have a rally at 180 Church. It was supposed to be a black church, and it may be a black church, but there wasn't any black people, very few black people in it. When you say a black church, my idea and people's idea is that it is a majority African American church. If that was the case, and if that is the case, that's not what you saw on Father's Day at that church. Now, here's some things that we just got to talk about. We really have to talk about these things. First of all, as a Detroiter, I'm offended. And as a man of faith, I'm offended when people use the church as a political backdrop. I really am. But then when you lie about it, that's even worse. You're going to lie about the church and that the church is a black church and you don't have majority of black people in it. It may be a black church. I am not familiar with 180 Church. I know where it is. I know where it's located. It is definitely in my congressional district off of Grand River. Don't have much experience with the church or much experience with the pastor. That is neither here or there. That doesn't matter at all. But what I am saying is that if you're going to go to a black church in Detroit, there are a whole lot of, listen to me, you got 77.8% of the population is African American in Detroit, 10th largest Black city in the country. There are a lot of Black churches that you can go to. I go to them literally every weekend. But the problem that I really have, there's several. One of them is that you are going to say, number one, that it's a Black church and don't have the majority of the people in the seats when you're there are African American. That's thing number one. Thing number two is that you are going to try to make believe, to influence people's thinking that there is some huge African American embrace of Donald Trump and Republican MAGA politics at this time. And it is not true. That's why you got to lie about being in a Black church. It may be a Black church, no Black people there. Or there were some Black people there, but it definitely wasn't a majority of the church. And you use these headlines to try and sway people, to make them believe that you are an advocate, Mr. Trump, for African American people, when that is definitely not the case. So just think about this part. Is that Donald Trump and his father were sued by the Department of Justice because of the aforementioned Fair Housing Act, discriminating against people in their apartments in New York. He also, in the case of the Central Park jogger being raped, put out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty of those African American and Latino young men, and even when they were exonerated, never apologized. He has called African countries S-hole countries, sugar honey iced tea countries. He has said extremely negative things about a former member of his staff, Omarosa Manigault, who says, by the way, that he is caught on a hot mic using the N-word. That hasn't been established, but they say that is somewhere. The recording is. He said he's done more for Black people than anybody in the country's history except Abraham Lincoln. As if the Civil Rights Act, the Voters' Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, even the Immigration Act that was done in the 60s wasn't important for people of African descent, African American people. Like he did something more. So let's get to some of the comments that he made in the speech.
Important area for us. We've done more for, and I say this, I say it proudly, more for the Black population than any president since Abraham Lincoln. That's a big statement. And Crooked Joe Biden has done nothing for you except talk. It's only talk. It's all talk. He gets nothing. He gets nothing for anyone who was lost. He's in Europe. He's walking around. He doesn't know where the hell he is, and he's supposed to help Detroit. I don't think so. But we achieved the lowest African-American unemployment rate and the lowest African-American poverty rate ever recorded during my 4 years. We lifted 6.6 million people out of poverty. Black Americans saw their largest increase in home ownership on record. There's never been anything like it. This is during our period of time. We gave record funding to historically Black colleges and universities. You all know that. I got great support. And I will just tell you a quick story. The heads of the colleges would come to Washington once every year. And after 2 years, they said, why do you guys keep coming? And I liked them. I liked a couple of them. Really, they're friends of mine. But the whole group was very, they were just terrific people. Men and women heading up the colleges. And I said, why do you keep coming? because they won't give us long-term financing. We have to come back every year. One said, and I say respectfully, he said they make us feel like a bunch of beggars. We have to come back to Washington every year. I said, well, we're going to take care of that. And I got them actually more money than they asked for by far, and we got them long-term financing. And I said, the only thing sad is that I'll never see you again, probably. I will never meet you again, because we got used to meeting. I kept saying, and then after a couple of years, I said, why do you have to keep coming back? I mean, he said, we've been doing this for a long time, for 20 years, I guess. The one gentleman said he was here 20 years. He's been doing it for 20 years. I said, that's not right. And they do a very important job and a great job. And so I got you long-term financing, and I think all of them are voting for Trump. I don't know. I can't say maybe, but I'd say 99% of them. And if they aren't, I don't know what the hell the other side did, but we'll start an investigation or something, okay?
So thing number one that he says that's not correct is that he's done more for the African-American community since Abraham Lincoln. As if the Voters' Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act weren't important for African Americans. They were hugely important. It's sort of like this fixation that the right has to make the 60s disappear. And if they can't make it disappear in your mind, they seem to want to bend it to say that the best time within the past 60 years for African Americans was actually the worst time. And that's what we talked about in regards to Representative Byron Donalds' comments. He also says, Mr. Trump says, that he had the lowest African-American unemployment in history, which is also not true. That's Joe Biden in 2023, I think it was, that he has the lowest African-American employment in history, and not Donald Trump. The other thing he says is that he gave more to HBCUs than Joe Biden, which again is not true. We gave $253 million to HBCUs that he authorized, that was pushed by a member of the CBC, who was a historically Black college student and professor. The Biden administration gave $7 billion to HBCUs compared to Donald Trump's $253 million, and is projected to give $16 billion in the next budget cycle. So that, again, is not true. I think the other thing that is so really frustrating for me is how they are going to try and make us think that African Americans are going to the Republican Party in some droves. The number one demographic that votes Democratic is African American women. The number two Democratic voters demographically are African American men. And I don't see in polls that are done. There was a poll done by African Americans where you saw like a 1%, 2%, 3% change. Not like this massive change. They're talking about 20 and 30%. That is never going to happen. The other thing that I saw that was disconcerting about this visit is that when you look at Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, this is her district, this is the district which I am challenging her for, she says nothing about the visit. She doesn't go to the visit. She doesn't protest the visit. She says nothing about the visit of the person who we know wants to radically change America for the worse. And she's not there, and she says nothing about it in her communications. That is a lack of leadership. As an independent candidate who is a straight shooter, you have to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And when you see a threat to America, foreign and domestic, which this MAGA movement is, why are you not saying anything? Why are you not saying anything about the fact that he is using a black church as a prop to lie and spread misinformation and disinformation. And so this is what happened on Father's Day here in the city of Detroit, along with our current event segments that we introduced at the beginning of the show. We will also have revolving regular segments. This one that we're going to talk about today is called WTH is Project 2025. Project 2025 has been called a manifesto. It's been called a playbook. It is called strategy imperatives that are supposed to go into effect on the first day of the Republican candidate's presidency in 2025 on January the 20th. It is one of the scariest things I have ever read in regards to a fundamental change of America as we know it. And I have been sounding a clarion call everywhere I go and everywhere I speak to let people know about 2025. And here's something that is a little bit disheartening. Not many people know about it. But the thing that we have to make sure is that if we continue to talk about it everywhere we go, at every water cooler, when we're at church, when we're at our organizational meetings, when we are at the gas station, just in common conversation to let them know what are the detractions for our community, for America, and focus it down to your particular community so people understand how Project 2025 can hurt them. One of the first things that I just want to talk about for my particular area, since the pandemic, I have gone inside of schools upwards of 200 times now, dealing with things from trauma to mental health issues, to bullying, to cyberbullying, to vaping, all of those different things. To bring me in, it is usually through funding through the Department of Education, called Title I and Title II funding dollars. Part of Project 2025 talks about how they want to rearrange and in some cases to totally dismantle and destroy and erase, get rid of the Department of Education, which gives us those funding dollars to have special speakers and programs and employees and things of that nature coming to the school. And also civil rights protections are administrated through the Department of Education in regards to schools. So getting rid of the Department of Education in Project 2025 is something that is absurd. It is totally absurd. So that's something I want to bring to you in this episode, just talking about getting rid of the Department of Education. And I want you to do your homework so the next podcast, the next episode, when we come to talk about Project 2025, you can put down in the comments of this video, what else would you like to know about Project 2025 in the comments? And also, while I'm thinking about it, subscribe, save, like, share, and all of those good things for this podcast to get it up in the algorithm so more people can see it. But Project 2025 is something that is one of the most dangerous things. When you talk about the Trump presidency last time, it was talked about as being unorganized. It was talked about as being chaotic. It was talked about as being, like amateur night at the Apollo. And so this time around, these entities that created the Heritage Foundation, along with other right-wing institutions and individuals, are thoughtfully planning out this reimagining of the American government, which is sometimes called the fourth branch of government, which is talked about as Department of Education, Department of Transportation, Department of Interior, all of these different agencies, NASA, all of them are considered said sometimes to be the fourth branch of government. And Project 2025 wants to totally reimagine those things. The next part that I'm going to talk about next week about Project 2025, it is just incredibly just scary. So do your own research, put some comments and questions down in this when this podcast is posted, talking about Project 2025, what you would like to know, and what you can do to spread the word about Project 2025. And listen, check me out when I am out at a commencement speech that I did just recently, talking to individuals, informing them about Project 2025. This is what we have to do.
Parents, I want you to understand that this is election season. Everybody, raise your hand if you know this is election season. This election is about to come up in August and in November. And you need to be engaged in the electoral process. Now, Mr. Garcia just said something that was really powerful that some of y'all might didn't catch. He said that we have some refreshments for you, and it was purchased with Title I dollars. Now, I want you guys to listen. There's some people that want to be elected to office that want to get rid of the Department of Education. Has anybody heard that? Has anybody heard of Project 2025? Well, I need you to go and do your research. Because in Project 2025, they say they want to get rid of the Department of Education. And I said, get rid of the Department of Education, where they give our schools like ours and schools like J.E. Clark and other schools in Detroit Title I and Title II dollars, so they can have these wonderful type programs that we're having today and that we have, that you guys have done for 4 straight quarters. They want to get rid of that funding. So that means that you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to go out and find out who it is that you should be voting for. Raise your hand if you've ever heard the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You've heard that name? One of the things that was so important that Dr. King did for us as he worked so that they could pass a law called the Voting Rights Act. And that Voting Rights Act gives us the ability to put people in office that do what we need them to do, so we can have the kind of schools, the kind of communities, and the kind of country that we want to have. So we have to make sure that on November the 5th and August the 6th, everybody 18 and above can go out and vote. So we can have these type of programs here at J.E. Clark and other schools in our community. My name is Royce Kennebrew, and always remember, I'm on your side.
Hello, this is Royce Kennebrew, independent candidate for Michigan's 12th congressional district, who, when elected, will caucus with the Democrats. The most difficult part about the campaigning process is raising funds. So if you want different leadership in Michigan's 12th congressional district, someone who is going to work for all constituents and not their own personal interests, please go to voteroyce.com. Give $5, $10, $15. Every and anything will help. Thank you. Another segment that we will be talking about every week, it is what is happening in the Middle East. And one of the things that I want to point out, and I talked about in our announcement video for my candidacy as an independent candidate, was that there have been calls for an Israeli ceasefire. I call for a regional ceasefire, which entails a ceasefire from Houthi rebels who have been attacking ships in the Red Sea and attacking American service people and have killed some, a ceasefire from Hezbollah, who is attacking Israel from the north, who has also a ceasefire from Hamas and a ceasefire from Israel as well. And I call for that regional ceasefire so that those hostages, Israeli hostages, can be released, and also so that Palestinian can receive aid inside of the Gaza Strip where it's desperately, desperately needed. But the question that I have noticed in regards to the coverage of the Middle East war is that even though Americans have been killed by Houthi rebels, even though Hezbollah is attacking Israel from the north and a larger conflict is brewing, Hamas has never stopped since the October 7th attack, that most people are only calling for Israeli ceasefire. So my question to you is, why is it aren't people calling for a regional ceasefire where Hamas, well, not that they aren't calling for it, they're not calling for as much as the Israeli ceasefire. Why aren't people calling in equal fashion and equal portion, if you will, the same passion and concern for the people that are being hurt by Houthi rebels, the people that are being shot at and rockets being launched into northern Israel by Hezbollah? Why don't people understand that Hamas has never stopped shooting? Ever since October the 7th, they have continued to attack and shoot rockets. But my question to you, and I want you to think about, is don't you want everyone to stop shooting? My position with the regional ceasefire is that I want everyone to stop shooting. But the question that I have for you, why aren't you calling for a Houthi rebel ceasefire as much as you're calling for an Israeli ceasefire? Why aren't you calling for a Hezbollah ceasefire as much as you're calling for Israeli ceasefire? Why aren't you calling for a Hamas ceasefire as much as you're calling for Israeli ceasefire? It seems to me that is a disproportionate call for Israeli ceasefire, even though the other groups that are attacking, hurting, and killing people are still shooting. Can you call for a ceasefire for all of those parties is the question that I want to ask. And I want you folks to put it down into the comments and give me your perspective on this. I want you to like this podcast. I want you to subscribe to this podcast. I want you to share it with your friends, because people need to have a balanced discussion of the issues, in particular those of the Middle Eastern conflict, the Israel-Gaza war. And so I want there to be a discussion that we have and individuals to understand that this Middle East conflict is just the most recent flare-up of a war in a conflict that has been going on for decades. And my point as an independent candidate is that when we see the images, when we hear about Israeli women being gang raped and Palestinian women and children and individuals in the Gaza Strip not having enough food, when we're talking about Israeli babies being burned, that is a part of war that we abhor and that we want peace in the region. But we need to be clear and understand that we can't make a decision on our chief and executive officer, the president of the United States, based on a conflict that has been occurring and flaring up for decades, And let me just give a little bit of context as well. People call and often talk about Biden's policies on the war. And it's not really Biden's policies on the war. It's America's policy on Israel. I don't believe, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who the president would be, that the same perspective and the same policy position would be the same no matter if you had Obama to be the president, no matter if it was Clinton, no matter if it was Reagan, no matter if it was either of the Bushes or Trump, that this policy, Israel is one of our closest allies, just like Canada, just like the UK, and changing foreign policy is sort of like turning a cruise ship. It doesn't happen fast, especially when the ally was attacked, and it's still being attacked. It's like people don't understand that they are being attacked by Hamas right now, and also being attacked by Hezbollah in the north, out of that border with Lebanon, as well as all these entities being funded by Iran. And so it is important for us to make sure that we support our allies, and we are critical on efforts and things that they do that are not right when they are engaging in that war. And I think that's what America has done. And I think that we should understand that this is a region that has been fought over for, based on who you talk to now. We're not just talking about 60, 70, 80 years, but people will talk about hundreds and even over 1,000 years that this region has been disputed. And so we don't want to get a Donald Trump as president. And if you think things are going to be better under Donald Trump for Palestinian people, you got another thing coming. You must have forgotten that one of his first official acts in office was the Muslim ban. Don't forget that. Last night, the Chicago Sky and Indianapolis Fever played a mega game that had two incredible rookies who we know as Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. And I had to come on and talk about this on the podcast because, as you can see, your boy is a Hawkeye alumnus. And so I just want to weigh in to talk about, first of all, if you didn't see that game last night, you have to see that game. They are talking about these two being the Magic and Bird of the WNBA and bringing that type of excitement. When you see that game, you're going to recognize that's not hyperbole. That game was phenomenal. Angel Reese was insanely good. Caitlin Clark was being Caitlin Clark. It was phenomenal. This is great for women's basketball. And so, as a former athletic director and one, as many as you guys know, I coach track and field right now as a way to mentor kids in the community. But this is phenomenal. Now, let me know down in the comments. Now, here's my thoughts about the USA women's basketball team. Are there better women to have on that team than Caitlin Clark to Angel Reese right now? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. But what would be good for the game? What would be good for the game is to have Angel. See, y'all talking about leaving Caitlin Clark off the team, but I'm talking about leaving Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese off the team. Both of their jerseys sold out immediately when they were drafted. So what I'm telling you is this, is that we should be concerned about having both of those young ladies on the team. To have them on the team at one time, how many eyeballs would that bring to NBC and Peacock and all of the places that the Olympics are going to be shown? I just think it's a no-brainer for me. I would have those two ladies on the team. And listen, I would just make two more spots. How do you lose with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark on the Olympics teams? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Again, share, like, and share, like, get me up in the algorithms, place your comments, and let other people know about the podcast. But let me tell you, dude, it's a no-brainer for me. Put both of those ladies on the team. It's going to be good for women's basketball. And here's the thing. Even if you took two of the ladies that's off of the team, that's on the team, off of the team, and put those two on, they're talking like, we've always won the gold medal. We've been undefeated. Nobody can beat us. If you put those two on and take two of them off, you still going to win. You could take half of the team that we got in America off and put somebody else on there, put me on there, and y'all still going to win. I mean, you put Asia Wilson and 4 other ladies on that team, you're going to win the gold medal. Okay, so let's not play like, oh, if we don't put the absolute best or who we got on there, that we're not going to win. No, you're going to win anyway. That's how good women's basketball is in America. You're going to win anyway, right? With 6 of the best, or 7 of the best, or 8 of the best, or 10 of the best, you're going to win anyway, and then bring the eyeballs to the game with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Just let me know what you think. All right, let me know what you think. And go and see that basketball game with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. It was epic, and the Chicago Fire won in the last seconds of the game. It was incredible.
Hello, this is Royce Kennebrew, independent candidate for Michigan's 12th congressional district, who, when elected, will caucus with the Democrats. The most difficult part about the campaigning process is raising funds. So if you want different leadership in Michigan's 12th congressional district, someone who is going to work for all constituents and not their own personal interests, please go to voteroyce.com. Give $5, $10, $15. Every and anything will help. Thank you.
With all of the serious topics that we deal with here on Dark Horse Politics Podcast, we want to end every episode with something funny. This is a clip from Don Lemon's show with Simone Sanders years ago before she got married. And she's on Don Lemon's show, but this has come across my timeline on Instagram and on YouTube several times. And I just want to leave you with that. So take a look at that.
I want to talk about the former White House aide, Omarosa Manigault Newman.
It's Black History Month. We got to talk about Omarosa. All right. I'm just saying, look, it is Black History Month, okay? Carter G. Woodson did not go to the mat to get Negro History Week that eventually turned into Black History Month for us to talk about Omarosa on her apology tour and her attempt to salvage her reputation on a reality television show. Not during Black History Month, Don.
Thank you for watching Dark Horse Politics Podcast, and we will hit you with episode 2 as soon as it comes up. And just to allow you to know, we're going to talk a little bit more deeply about the messaging that is being done and the misinformation and disinformation that is being done through that. That's very important because it is impacting the way people think that they're going to vote or if they are going to vote. And we're going to do that in episode 2 of Dark Horse Politics Podcast. This is Royce Kennebrew, independent candidate for Michigan's 12th congressional district. We'll see you next time.